this right here, this is not a Onewheel.
What?
It has a Onewheel motor, but the controller has been built by makers PEV, and the self-balancing firmware, instead of using Future Motion's algorithm, has been written entirely from scratch by the community. And when they wrote it, they didn't just give us 3 shitty little sliders that barely do anything. They gave us, honestly, way too many options. But let's go shred it.
You.
Oh God, there's a dog. Long story short, I took this Vesc board out the other day for an hour, and I kind of don't want to ride my Onewheel anymore. The Vesc firmware that I tested a couple years ago was terrible, like worse than Trotter. But unlike Future Motion, the Vesc firmware is constantly improving, and the rate of improvement lately has been getting even faster because it's open source, so the more people that get involved, the faster it improves. So a couple months ago, the Vesc I rode still felt weird and had a fatal flaw, which was called nose hunting. Basically, every time you'd ride over bumpy terrain, the nose would creep down and it would feel super sketch. This was fixed last week with an update from Mitch Lustig. Shout out Mitch. And I thought, wow, that's great. That's a huge milestone. But there's still the whole muscle memory issue where the board just feels weird. Because the Vesc we had a month or two ago, it kind of felt like when you drive someone else's car and the gas and the brake just feel different than you're used to. And it doesn't necessarily mean that their car is worse, but at the very least it takes some getting used to. And I thought I would have to start a long process of getting used to this board before I was comfortable on it. That was not the case. Within a couple miles, I was doing everything I would have been doing on my XR that I have thousands of miles on, and I know like the back of my hand. There are a couple settings I do want to mess around with, and I'll be getting my own Vesc controller soon to try to dial in these settings. And honestly, I think it'll be a few weeks max before the Vesc is just absolutely my favorite board. One thing that has been better about the Vesc for a while is the sensor activation, like when you step back on your board after you get off. It's just much more reliable on the Vesc. And while that's mostly important for tricks and racing, I think what everyone will enjoy on the Vesc is the carvability. Lots of you are familiar with the feeling of going back to a Vega after riding an aftermarket tire that is much more nimble and softer. And you're on your friend's board with a Vega and you try to make a sharp turn and the board is like, oh, you want to turn? Well, you can turn like this much, but not that much. So let's just calm down, all right? Well, I hate to say it, but if you are riding on FM firmware, you are still riding on a Vega that is located inside of your controller box. And every Vesc I've ridden feels like the carvability is turned up to like 1,000. You can make such insanely tight circles at higher speeds than you ever would have thought possible. I think Future Motion turned this down on purpose so that first-time riders would be less likely to fall, because if you're standing on the board trying to learn how to balance and you tip all the way over on your toes, you don't really want the board to accelerate quickly here. So I get it. I get why they would have turned down the board's ability to move quickly on edge, but if you know how to ride, I can't really imagine anyone wanting to turn this down. And I think a lot of you who switch to Vesc will no longer want as squirrely of a tire because you will be getting so much more squirreliness from the settings. And the reason that this is such good news is because the XR is already discontinued, which means that pretty soon, if you have an XR that breaks and you try to send it back to FM, they'll tell you, oh, well, we've sunsetted that product, but we'd be happy to upgrade you to a brand new Pint X. The thing is, The XR is the preferred favorite board of myself and countless other riders, and pretty soon, if our BMS breaks or our controller breaks, buying a new one simply won't be an option. And a used XR BMS is already going for like $500. A new little Fokker controller box is $300 and doesn't even require a BMS. And again, since this is open source, the evolution will continue and the innovation will happen at a much faster pace than future motion. We're going to see controllers and electronic components that are increasingly harder to break, hot swappable batteries. All these things that we've been asking for years are finally going to become a reality because we won't be limited by what Future Motion is allowing us to do. Future Motion had a 7-year head start, and since then they've focused their efforts on stifling competition and locking out customers from having repair options instead of actually innovating. Let me just recap real quick all of the innovation that FM has done in the past 7 years that improved the board from my perspective personally. In 2017, they came out with better foot pads, better sensor pads. In 2018, they put more batteries in the board. And this year, they made a more powerful board that is arguably worse than the XR that came out 4 years ago. The thing is, they don't need to innovate because they have no competition. I'm sure there are engineers at FM who are totally capable of doing this stuff and would love to improve the Onewheel. But in the past 7 years, most of the changes that FM has made to their products has made them worse. As far as I'm concerned, the only positive change that Future Motion has made to the Onewheel in the past 5 years is to put more batteries inside. So the main reason why I want to switch to Vesc isn't even for the customizability. It's mainly to keep riding XR instead of a Pint or GT, not depend on FM and FM parts for repairs, stop supporting FM because of their anti-consumer and anti-innovation practices, the software lockouts, the planned obsolescence, the prevention of repairs by design, and instead support a community that is actually pushing the sport and the technology forward and making boards that are designed to be easy to repair and modify instead of hard. If you're concerned that FM might go out of business, then switching to Vesc sooner than later is probably the move. And even if you don't have a problem with any of that, there's still the appeal of the level of customization that you get with a Vesc. You can add torque tilt back, which essentially means that your board will automatically raise the nose when it's going uphill, although this feature is not as useful as you might think, like for the pump track, where the ups and downs are happening really rapidly, because it takes a second for the board to realize that the grade has changed. This is more a feature for, let's say, commuting in San Francisco, where it's pretty smooth, but like one block might be totally flat and the next a 30-degree uphill. And when it senses the extra torque from going uphill, it'll lift the nose so that it doesn't scrape. Speaking of hill climbing, the Vesc crushes the GT in hill climbing. You can check out Mad Max's comparison video from a few months ago. The Vesc doesn't even need momentum, it just climbs like a beast and it won't stall or turn off on you. You can also customize pushback however you want, including the angle that the nose rises to, how rapidly it rises. Do you want pushback just at a certain speed, or do you only want pushback when the motor is at a certain percent of its limits? There are products that Onewheel riders are currently spending time and money on, like permaposing their foot pads, installing a tilt kit for W rails, or Badger Wheels Sure Start. These are all great for a Onewheel, but completely unnecessary for a Vesc because you can just go in your settings and push a few buttons to do all of that. Vesc originally was really only for DIYers who wanted to spend a ton of time messing around with their settings. It will always have that level of customization available, but some people just want to turn their board on and ride. Right now, we're getting to a point where you can swap a Vesc controller straight into your board without having to buy a whole bunch of components and solder wires together. I'm going to do a video soon on the process of Vesking my board, so we will see how difficult the install is. Currently, my biggest beef with the Vesc is that messing around with the settings is not intuitive or easy to do. There are a lot of settings. Settings don't really have descriptions, and with all the drop-down menus and sub-menus, it's hard to even find the few settings that you do know the function of. There needs to be a basic settings menu if this is going to appeal to the masses. I think there's a huge opportunity for someone to make an app that is user-friendly and summarizes the key settings in a way that's easy to understand and make adjustments. Sharing settings or tune cards is currently much more difficult than you'd think, and you can only save one as a backup. You should be able to save multiple tune cards so that you can switch from one ride mode to another with the click of a button. Let's say you want to have an uphill mode, one for downhill, one for gnarly trails, a battery saver or range extender mode, etc., etc. But this will come in due time, and the more people that are working on Vesc, the faster it will progress. A week ago, I would have said Vesc is the future. Now, it's the now.